Welcome to the Blessors of Israel podcast. I'm Matthew Dodd, Executive Director of Blessors of Israel. I'm in studio today with Pastor Rich Jones, who is the founder and chairman of Blessors of Israel. Pastor Rich, I wish we were in studio under different circumstances, but as you know, this last weekend, early Saturday morning, Hamas, unprovoked, unprecedented attack, multiple fronts, land, sea, and air, attacked the southern portion of Israel. And I'm sure many of those who are watching our podcast would like to understand our perspective at Blessors of Israel regarding what has transpired and what is about to come.
1,500 militants invading Israel's borders and roaming the streets, killing, destroying, kidnapping, taking hostages. I mean, these are words and terms we never thought we would hear. Unbelievable. There's fighting in the streets in Israel. Hamas, 1,500 militants. Unbelievable. And I think, there's just so many questions to ask. How is it possible that the greatest service in the world regards to intelligence has missed it, right? That's a question I think everybody is asking in the world. But I think the more important question right now is, what does Israel do in response? Well, of course, everybody who knows Israel very well knows that their first response will be massive. They have done a complete and entire siege on Gaza, shut off the water, electricity, food, fuel. I mean, it is a complete and utter siege. Now, that will bring tremendous international pressure to bear eventually. But for now, this, of course, is what they must do in order to create leverage over this enemy. Israel is at war. And this has far, far-reaching implications for Israel today.
Agreed. Many fronts. And there's also concern about to the north with Lebanon, Syria.
Hezbollah did test the borders on the north. They were immediately repelled.
But they shot 15, mainly into Upper Galilee, right. And many of them landed in the fields and whatnot. No casualties.
Interestingly, I think there were, if I recall right, maybe 5-6 militants in trying to do an incursion from the north. They were immediately repelled, and interestingly, Hezbollah denied that they were their fighters. Interesting. Nevertheless, that border on the north is secured at the moment. Of course, we're concerned about a wider war, right? Iran, they're denying involvement, but the fingerprints of Iran are all over this.
Wall Street Journal, Washington Post have all come out pointing their finger at Iran for what has transpired.
Well, they were Iranian weapons.
Exactly.
I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Now, of course, the question, how do they get equipped with such weapons? And they were shooting, if I recall right, maybe 5,000 rockets. Well, that, of course, is another breach of security that has to be figured out.
Exactly right.
They overwhelmed the Iron Dome, and that, of course, is the only way to defeat the Iron Dome is to just throw so many that it cannot keep up with them. That's what happened. And so many of them landed in residential areas. They are deliberately targeting civilians. And when they were moving through the streets and taking hostages, I mean, they were killing babies.
And what's interesting about that is I was reading an interview on Sky News with the former Palestinian minister and director of Hamas's international relations. And the report from Sky News was asking, how can you justify the killing of Israeli civilians? Right. The response was, we don't consider them civilians. We consider them part of the Israeli military. That was their response. And then he doubled down on that as well. That's the mindset, that's the rationale, that's the propaganda that's been fed into the Palestinians so that they look at the Israelis all sorts, all sizes, all ages.
Sure, but here's
not
the
as enemy, not as civilians, but as enemy combatants.
They can say what they want.
Agreed.
And the problem, of course, is going to be, how is this going to be viewed in the eyes of the world? Because whatever they thought that they were going to accomplish is going to fail. Well, now, first of all, we have to recognize that their intent is to destroy. They will not succeed. They will never succeed. But they cannot give up.
How do we know that they won't succeed?
Well, now, here's the thing. With Iran, that is a nation state with almost, or do they have, nuclear capability? So this thing could step up and wrap up very quickly.
Interestingly enough, just a couple of weeks ago, they were saying, the United States was saying that Iran is 2 weeks away from being at full capacity for converting uranium.
Now, it doesn't mean that they will be ready to use it.
Exactly, but they had the capability.
They're getting the capability. So you bring in a nation state. And I think now what we're seeing, a strategy, is I think that they're testing a strategy.
Agreed.
So that in the future, when all hell breaks loose on Israel, which we know is going to happen, that it will be a multi-front attack from the north, from the east, from the south.
Yes.
And it will be provoked by Iran. That is the major agitator of this provocation. And clearly Hezbollah in the north, but then Syria could well be brought into it. Who knows? Perhaps even Russia. So, I mean, we're kind of reaching out far. I'm just concerned what's happening right now.
Agreed, but I do see the chessboard being set for
Yes.
all of these things, and I think the response of the various nations to this attack against Israel is revealing as well.
It is.
Especially the BRIC nations.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. China, their response was rather tepid. Hey, we want there to be a peace. This is a failure on the part of the United States. There needs to be a two-state solution.
Right.
That was their response.
Very tepid.
Very similar to Russia.
Russia's response, let's have a ceasefire. Wait a minute, you just attacked unprovoked and killed
now over 1,000 people.
over 1,000 Israelis, the vast majority of which are civilians, and now you want a ceasefire? No, Israel has a right to defend themselves and to dismantle Hamas.
Exactly. Now, with that, then you have Iran, which is no surprise. Obviously, they're the state funders of Hezbollah and Hamas.
Although they're denying involvement.
But initial reports were they were very much involved. In fact, they greenlit the whole thing.
Well, I mean, Hamas came out and said it.
They did, and then they backtracked.
Well, but their first acknowledgement, I think what happened was Iran told them, stop saying that.
I agreed.
But they nevertheless said it. It's on the record for what they said. Iran's fingerprints are all over it.
We do see the Western European nations, the Western nations, taking the side of Israel in this. These other nations are more of a moderate, tepid response.
But nevertheless, understanding Israel's right to
They understand the
themselves.
gravity. And Saudi Arabia.
Interesting
response on their part. Here we have all these discussions regarding this new alliance, this new agreement, this new treaty between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States, trying to broker the whole thing. Obviously, that has a monkey wrench thrown into the whole deal at this point.
Which perhaps was the point.
I think so, too. In fact, I believe it was Hamas, no, it was Hezbollah, one of their leaders, that said anyone who's considering in the Arab world to reconcile with Israel, be warned. Be warned.
Right. But nevertheless, again, it is an interesting dynamic.
I agree. But their response was also more tepid and even almost accusatory towards Israel, saying this is what you get when you push into these West Bank and Gaza Strip locations.
Well, now, okay, to speak to that, I mean, I think there certainly has been concern, right? Because we have seen tensions, the temperature rising, and I suppose everybody felt there was a boiling point that was going to come, but I don't think anybody, well, Israel most certainly didn't expect, nor did anybody really expect it to be to this degree.
Didn't it look like they were more focused on the West Bank? They weren't really paying attention to the Gaza Strip, I've also seen reports, as you have, in regards to that was part of Hamas and their plan to make it look as though, hey, everything's fine on this front, look over there,
Right.
don't pay attention to what we're doing here, even though they even set up a village, a mock village,
The signs were there.
and did all these drills
Right.
in preparation for this very
Right.
thing.
And I think ultimately Hamas has been, let's say, lulling Israel to sleep. And in fact, interestingly, some number of months ago when the Islamic Jihad from Gaza had launched various attacks, Hamas was like, no,
They distanced themselves from the whole thing.
we're not part of that. Please don't think we're part of that. And again, it's part of a strategy,
Agreed.
I believe, of lulling Israel to sleep.
And this wasn't haphazard. We're talking about a military level type of strategy here that had to be executed with great precision
That's right.
when you're coming by land, by air, and by sea.
Right.
And they did so.
Very, very well planned, obviously months in the making of the plan. And you look at one step at a time of what they did. This was so well coordinated. They overran the police stations on the borders and then took the weapons and munitions from those police stations to further arm the militants as they were heading into Israel.
Exactly right. They empowered themselves, enabled themselves by grabbing those munitions and equipment. I want to go back to the world response, though.
Okay.
And I find it interesting that on the one hand, you do have that positive response, pro-Israel response. But then we're also seeing within the capitals of many European, South Africa, or Australia even, Sydney, the Opera House, you had people
Right.
chanting outside the Sydney Opera House saying, gas the Jews, kill the Jews. And so isn't it amazing that you're talking about a nation the size of Rhode Island, 10 million Jews, approximately citizens, and look at the amount of division this one nation causes and the response that you get globally from this nation.
Although I think careful wording would say it's not that this nation causes it. I think anti-Semitism
Well,
causes it.
but they are the
Yeah, they're the
focal
target.
point. They're target.
And we are seeing anti-Semitism. I mean, look at the response of universities, the students and professors around this nation. It's the anti-Semitism is coming out of the woodwork. Now, here's an interesting twist, I think, on the thing, too. They are saying Israel caused this by the blockade, the essential blockade that they've been doing on Gaza. They're saying, see, you caused it. Well, this is an absolute confusion of cause and effect, right? Well, the reason that Israel had to do a blockade of Gaza is because Hamas continues to try to destroy Israel. What are they supposed to do in response to that? Open the borders? No, you have to bring some kind of semblance of control if the enemy in your boundary is determined to kill you. And so, but you see how the cause and effect.
Agreed.
Oh, Israel is the one is causing the problem, when in fact, no, that is the result of Hamas wanting to destroy them.
But they also fail to recognize that it was Israel that opened up the border so that citizens from Gaza could come in and work, give them work visas, so that they could earn a higher wage,
Right.
which would then be beneficial to those living within Gaza.
Israel just opened those borders, what was it, a week, 10 days before that attack?
Yeah.
And again, that was a sign of goodwill, right? And I think what does Israel want? I think they want peace with their neighbors, right? They want to be recognized their right to exist, and they want their neighbors to recognize that right to exist and to be at peace. Like they don't want to be at war with Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran or the West Bank. They don't want these battles. They're not trying to agitate these things. We want to have peace with our neighbors. Just we'll recognize your right, you recognize our right, and let's be at peace. But the Palestinian Arab populations of Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the Palestinian Authority, they're absolutely committed to the destruction of Israel. How do you make peace with that?
You never can.
No.
You have enemy within your border, and as a government, you have one responsibility, and that is to protect the citizens within that border.
And I think partly, when we talk about the West Bank, I go again, in Israel, they prefer us to say Samaria, Judea, but West Bank. So the attitude, I think, of a lot of the Israeli leadership is that we have worked so hard and long at trying to bring about an agreement that it has failed every single time. At some point, they just say it's not working, and they move on past it. And that means that there are settlements that are continuing to be built. And again, here's where the temperature starts to rise. And thereby is the problem. Can there be peace? Well, that brings up, of course, scriptures, latter-day events, and a conversation far too deep that we have time for today.
But I do think, as I said earlier, the stage is being set.
Right.
The hand is being revealed for all of these national actors as to what they say about Israel and her existence.
Right.
And I see personally that Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Battle of Gog and Magog, you see the playing field being set for that alliance that will attack Israel. They will be outmanned, outgunned, but as you stated earlier, Israel's going to survive because God is going to divinely intervene and deliver with 4 cataclysmic judgments against those nations led by Russia against Israel.
He who touches you touches the apple of my eye.
Exactly
God
right.
said. Now, I know this question that I have here is, let's say, a little far-ranging, but is it possible to imagine that such an event could happen within the boundaries of the United States?
I think so.
Yes, absolutely so. Because we are seeing an infiltration of our borders of militants happening even right now as we speak. There is an infiltration of militants happening in our country.
It was just in the news the other day. We have people coming from military-age males coming from Syria through our southern border. And there are talks about there already being these pockets in our country right now.
Right.
And you're going to be, what are they going to be looking for? They're going to be looking for those vulnerable targets.
Exactly.
Where they can maximize casualties.
I would like to do us to do a podcast on that, because I think that we need to be on the alert and to understand that there is an ever-present danger in our current country and environment of what's happening. We are being infiltrated. I want to go back, though, to Hamas and, again, what they are trying to accomplish. Because when the militants go through and literally kill women, old men, babies, and I don't want to be too graphic, but...
Well, they discovered 40 children and babies beheaded.
Exactly.
And torn apart.
And the kibbutz down next to Gaza, every living soul was killed.
Yep.
And when they behead babies, there is an outcry of the world against that. I mean, there is no semblance of reason. There's no semblance of righteousness. That is as evil can be. And the sentiment of the world is loudly against such an atrocity.
I would say yes, and I would say no.
Well, I'm talking about the vast majority.
The vast
of course,
majority.
You always have elements.
But yes, exactly
elements
right.
of evil.
Yeah, but we do have this now axis of resistance, these BRICS nations and these nations that are developing, and they feel justified by the actions that they're taking right now.
Exactly right. But they are also, let's say their reaction is tepid, because they understand Israel's right to self-defense. And that Israel, they expect Israel to really dismantle Hamas if they can.
But wouldn't you say that the response is tepid because they're playing the same game that Hamas played?
That could well be.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Don't pay attention. Oh, everything's fine here until it's not.
Right.
See, that's what I see here. Is everything is being set in place until it's go time. And then everyone comes out and their true colors are revealed.
Oh, I think you're right. I mean, clearly there is anti-Semitism that is deeply rooted in the nations of the world. And we are seeing visual outcroppings of it, but there's a deep, deep anti-Semitism.
And I know we're running long on time, but I want to circle back to our southern border just real quickly, because, We do have a relationship with Israel. The United States does. They are our strongest allies in the Middle East, and Israel doesn't have a greater ally than the United States in the world.
That's right.
You can see how if our southern border makes us vulnerable and that something similar to this happens, okay, we're talking maybe 1,000 plus Israelis were killed. Put that in perspective in terms of what would that mean if the same thing were to happen in the United States. We're talking about tens of thousands of Americans that have been killed.
That's right.
You weaken the Americans' ability, and we, by the way, are now very vulnerable because we've been helping with Ukraine. We're concerned about Taiwan. We have our southern border and now Israel. We are spent on munitions. We are in a very, very precarious spot. So how can we help the others and also help ourselves at the same time? You can see how the enemy would want to seize upon this moment of weakness in the United States, which would then translate in the United States' inability to defend Israel further when they need her most.
Well, and I think that would require, state-level activity, right? And we're not seeing state-level yet actions, but what we are seeing is let's call it the foundation building.
Exactly right.
We are seeing in the darkness there's motion. Something is building. There is a storm arising.
One of the things I want to, as we get ready to wrap up, tell our viewers is I'd like to encourage them to take a look at our YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, and Apple Podcast channel. Recently, Pastor Rich did an entire teaching on the modern Palestinian problem. We broke it up into segments to make it more digestible so you can understand the various topics, and Pastor Rich does an excellent job of walking through the history of the modern Palestinian problem. I'd encourage you to check that out. I think it'll be time well spent. It will help you be more informed as to why we see what's happening and how it's unfolding before our very eyes. Plus, he brings in Scripture so you can see how it relates to the return of Jesus Christ, which is the very thing that Jesus told us to do, to stay alert, to be prepared for his return. You see, we need to know where to stand and how to stand as these events unfold. And I think I'd like to close with that in particular. What are your thoughts, Pastor Rich, for those who are viewing regarding how we as Christians should stand in the midst of this horrific act against Israel?
Well, absolutely. Those who bless Israel will be blessed. Those who curse Israel will be cursed. We stand with Israel. And we believe that God's hand is going to intervene, but we now need to pray. We need to support. I know in our church we're going to do a relief fund to help the families in Israel directly impacted from this. But the main issue now is prayer. We need to stand with Israel, support them spiritually, stand with them, and understand that this is part of what the Lord spoke of, that is leading up to those latter days. Watch for the signs of the times. Stay on the alert. Kingdom will rise against kingdom, nation against nation. But do not be afraid. That is not yet the end.
Exactly right. And I think we need to pray for our leaders. We need to pray for our leaders that they would have divine wisdom, that they would make wise decisions, because when there is righteous leadership, the people prosper.
Right.
And so we really need to be in prayer for those things.
And I'll tell you, I know we're trying to wrap up here, but what I believe is going to happen is, of course, Israel is going to bring a massive response. And then, little by little, the nations are going to start pressuring Israel to stop, to back it off, because Israel will go until they are essentially
I think you're exactly right. I think you're exactly right. There's going to be a groundswell of support, but that will only last for so long before people say, this is enough.
Well, for example, the total siege of Gaza. I'm talking about no food, no water, no fuel,
electricity, nothing.
No electricity. Yep. Complete and total siege. Now, that is essentially, let's say, punishing the whole for the sins of the few. That's what Mindy would say. What Israel would say is we have to get leverage.
Yeah, but Netanyahu would also say, just another rabbit trail here, but he would also say, I gave you a heads up. Remember, he said, get out.
Yeah.
And
if you do this again, this is what will happen. But my point is this: if they cut off the water, the food, electricity, at some point the suffering. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
When that suffering,
I think there's 2 million there in the Gaza Strip area, 2.5.
but the suffering is going to
It's going to be tremendous.
tremendous because no food, no water. I mean, how long is that going to last, right? And then the outcry of the nations comes. And that's when the back pressure starts to back that off. But in the meantime, they're going to take full advantage of the opportunity while they have the full support, let's say, of the nations. They're going to bring it to bear. They're going to do everything.
Netanyahu said we're going to change literally the face of the Middle East.
They have called up their military 300,000 plus. They are going to do something massive. Could well be bringing their soldiers right into Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Well, I again wish it was under better terms, better circumstances, but we're so grateful that you take time to join us today. I want to encourage you to take a look at our website. If you haven't done so, visit blessors.org. That's blessors with an ORS.org. Every day we are updating our website with articles that we write, also articles from other sources so that you can stay informed with the best curated content regarding Israel and the Middle East, especially now with what's going on with Hamas attacking Israel and now Israel's response to that. You can check a look at our podcasts on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, and Apple Podcasts. Also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Getter. And we also covet your prayers and your partnership. You know, we've only been now as an organization going for about 7 months, and God is already blessing our ministry greatly as we seek to inform the church and prepare the church for the latter days in regards to how to support Israel, to stand with her in these latter days. So again, thank you for joining us today. Remember, those who bless Israel will be blessed. Shalom, shalom.